book, The Physics of Heaven. Been reading Judy Franklin's book, The Physics of Heaven.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and reading all about how our entire body is the electromagnetic field and the vibrations that we are sensitive to.
Yeah.
Really a good book.
And I think there's lots of different ways that God is using to unveil that whole thing of frequency and energy and vibration. And, you know, he holds everything together by the voice of his power.
Yes.
And that is a vibrational frequency within the fabric of everything. You know, what he spoke in creation contains within the fabric of it that energy, which is his voice holding it all together and keeping it all from falling apart, in a sense. And, you know, that the connection to his voice and energy and vibration and frequency, and then how that interacts with each part of us. You know, in some senses, you know, there's a lot of stuff out there which is, you know, neither here nor there, really. I mean, I think it's what you apply when God speaks to you in it, and that truth is outworked as we embrace it, you know. And I think whether it's sacred oils or musical frequency or sound frequencies, you know, or light frequencies, you know, they all can carry something, or they can carry nothing, you know. And the thing is what's imparted in through it when God speaks to us. It's not just that it's words. Those words are alive. Those words carry energy. So they carry something that actually empowers them to succeed. They're a container of something. I mean, you know, I could read the word out of a dictionary and I'm just reading a word, or I can read something with feeling, or I can speak something with feeling, and it actually contains my emotions in what I say, you know. And you can pick up whether someone's angry or upset or happy, even within the way they say certain things. So words are containers, and if they contain a intention that has a power or an energy with them, when we speak them, they can create or they can destroy. Life and death is in the power of the tongue. Well, it's not the tongue, it's what the tongue actually says. So the words contain something, you know. And actually, if, you know, when you say certain words to people, they convey emotions that people feel. So they hear you say, I love you, and they feel something beyond just what the word says. The same with, you know, someone says, I hate you, then you get something of the emotion that comes within it. And the same, you know, applies to words, thought and spoken to inanimate things. People say that speaking to plants help them grow. Well, how much truth is in that? I don't know. But the reality is, when you look at, you know, Emoto's things of writing the word love or the word hate on a piece of paper and sticking it on a jar of rice, the one that has love on it continues without showing any signs of degradation or mold or that type of thing. And the one with hate on it basically gets moldy really quickly. So there's something that's actually in the power of words and intention that we do need to learn how to use. And I think to realize that that's how God has done things. He spoke things into being because he was speaking out of his heart and intention and his thought, that then became, you know, light be and light became. And I think if we're going to learn to create and we're going to learn to be creative as sons of God, then we have to use that same energy, that when we have thoughts and within the intention of our minds, that our consciousness is able to create reality through the power that's contained within those thoughts. And that's the quantum physics thing of quantum observation. You observe something and it aligns to the thoughts of your observance. So if you think something is going to spin clockwise and you look at it, it does. If you think it's going to spin anti-clockwise and you look at it, it doesn't. If you don't look at it, you've no idea what it's doing. It's like Schrodinger's cat. Is it dead or is it alive? You don't know until you observe it. But the intent that you observe it actually causes it to be one thing or another. And I think the power of our minds and our consciousness and the creativeness that God has placed within us is great. And I think words, carry something of the vibrational energy and frequency that, we're beginning to discover. And books like Physics of Heaven and Quantum Glory and other books like that sort of have some insight into some things. And I think people who are empowered or mandated to use frequencies have the power within what they do. I think someone else could try and use the same thing and not have a mandate, and it doesn't carry any authority. Just because something works for someone doesn't mean it's going to work for somebody else, because it's actually, does it contain the energy of God within it? And that's when we try to formularize something, we lose all the energy of something. It's like someone gets a mandate from God, they do it and it's awesome, and then they write a book about it, and then they tell other people, and they start doing conferences about it, and then other people try and copy it, and it doesn't work for them unless they have a mandate. But most people don't, and they're then disappointed that they thought this was going to be it. This was the next thing. And it didn't work, because actually it only worked for the people who had the mandate to deliver it. And I think you'll find that all over, really, in life. But there is something using sound, using frequencies. On the intensive, I did try that. I use the communion declarations that I do, and I actually declared them using certain frequencies of sound, using crystal bowls, to impart that vibrational energy that's within the life of God. And they took the bread and the juice, and then as I spoke those words, my intention was to activate what they had done with the sound, not just of the words I was speaking, but carried into them. So when we eat a piece of bread that we are representing as the body in Jesus, we have to see it as containing life and energy and vibration and frequency, that when we take it into ourselves, starts to resonate areas of our physical being, whether it be at our genetic level or at a spiritual level in us, actually start to see a resonance take place with the energy contained within what we've taken in. Or it can just be a piece of bread and a little sip of something, and that's it. If you don't actually activate it and engage it, it's just a ritual. But when you really engage it, and faith is the ability to actually believe what is happening, which is given to us by God, then something begins to happen, because it's activated with the energy contained within those things. And I think, the more intentional we are with things, the more power there is with things. It's intentional. And when I use sounds to release an intention, it is carried beyond what the mind would be able to receive. And I think that's why I think you can use things like that. Like fragrances, some fragrances like frankincense and other things cross the brain-blood barrier. And so they activate beyond what is possible without the carrier of that. Some things don't get into our system because they don't go beyond that barrier, whereas certain fragrances like frankincense and other essential oils and different things can cross that blood-brain barrier. And particularly when you're ministering to people like with toxic emotions, or you're ministering to people into trauma, those fragrances can open that trauma up for it to be released. When a person maybe can't even fully remember the trauma, it may be dissociated, or it may just be hidden or buried, actually oils carrying the intent of the person to open up and bring things into the light, to bring wholeness and healing, can pass into the subconscious, the unconscious, into someone beyond their conscious thinking, and engage it and unveil it and release it. So people are using oils with frequencies. People are using light. People are using things which do carry something, and they have the ability to go deeper than you can just normally do. because they're sort of activated in somebody. So yeah, interesting. Yeah, God's opening these things up, and as Christians, we've got to not reject them like it's been happened in the past, but actually see what is God in this. Not just be gullible and take everything you read, but actually go back to God and say, give me revelation of what you are doing in this, so that it comes from you rather than just, hey, here's the latest fad or the latest this, that, and the other. But there are things which God have created that has power to function even if people don't really know God. It's some, sowing and reaping, the laws of Jerusalem, they carry with it authority. They work, because they're built within the fabric of things, and they have an effect, even if you don't really understand it or actually know God's behind it. When people are positive, they find they're successful much more. People are negative, they find that negatively affects their life and affects what they do. And that happens, So, yeah. Anyway, let's throw it open. Anything else anyone wants to talk about or share? Or?
Yeah, I was remembering your lesson on toxic thoughts and how it affects our entire body when we contain those toxic thoughts and don't take them captive and get rid of them and keep playing certain scenarios over in our head over and over again, and what it does to us emotionally, and just how it can just wreak havoc throughout our entire body.
Yeah, it's we are holistic beings, really, and that things that are beyond what you can see have an effect, both positive and negative, which is why we need to maintain that peace. That's why love, joy, and peace, I think, were such a focus of Jesus's ministry. Because if we live in love, joy, and peace, we live in the relationship that God have with each other. I mean, that's what, when you stand within the circle of their relationship, love, joy, and peace are the overwhelming emotional experiences that you feel.
I had someone who was calling me, continued to call me late at night with issues, and finally I just had to let them know I will not be taking any more calls from you between 11 p.m. and 8 a.m. in the morning. They didn't quite understand it, but that was to protect me, because they called me with all this negativity late at night or early in the morning, and then I'm stuck with it, So it's just to protect myself. I'm not taking their calls that time anymore.
Sure. And I think, we've got to be careful to maintain that we have authority on what we receive into our lives. So we can be boundary stones for our own lives that will not allow things into our lives and cross those boundaries. But you have to be intentional about it. Again, it's an intentionality. I am a boundary stone. I have a boundary around me. I'm also filling the atmosphere around me with things which aren't going to allow negative things to have an impact. If I'm negative, then I draw negativity. It's birds of a feather flock together. And we have if we give out an atmosphere, that atmosphere itself can attract negative things. And, we sort of think about people's attitudes and people's thinking, and we use terms like stinking thinking or stinking attitudes because they attract negative things. So if we maintain an attitude of love, joy, and peace, and we allow rivers of living water to flow through us, and we create an atmosphere of love around us, then we're going to influence people rather than them influencing us. So we take authority of the spheres and then, administrate them. So, yeah. Okay, Mary, you got your hand up there? Patiently.
Oh, yeah. Well, talking about the whole thing about speaking words, one of the things that got covered in the conference with the Mahoney's last week, was talking about, and I'm not sure where this comes from in Judaism. I'm willing to say, okay, I've heard it before, is where the actual letters of the Hebrew alphabet are actual spirit beings. And so when it talks about that you could see the voice of God, like John said, he turned and he saw the voice, that seeing the voice was actually when God spoke using the Hebrew, there were spiritual beings that were coming out, because all the letters are supposed to be spiritual beings and they each have a specific purpose. I don't know a whole lot about that. One of the interesting things that they brought up was they wrote out the Hebrew alphabet, and you were to look at it and you were to pick out the 6 letters that resonated with you. All they had were the images. You didn't know what they were or what they meant. And then just make a note of what they were, and then go back and see what do the letters mean in terms of, you know, not just their numerology, but what do they represent. And that would give you somewhat of a snapshot of what is on your scroll. Not a full understanding of it, but would sort of give you like a, like I said, a snapshot, a sort of a guide in terms of what is on your scroll, which is interesting. I never heard of that before. So I went ahead and did the numbers. A lot of them really correlated. A lot of it really correlated with all together of, like, you know, I could say, okay, I can see this. Yes, this works, this works, this works. I haven't really sat down though and gone through it again and really processed it, but that was a very interesting concept. Another thing that they talked about, now again, this is coming out of Judaism and I don't know where, is that allegedly in Jewish thought that there is a spirit who has your scroll and reads it out when the sun comes up. Basically speaks it out into the atmosphere, whatever is written on the scroll for the day. And so what they suggested was to purposely put yourself in the position to say, okay, whatever is being read for the day, even though you're consciously not hearing the words, but to come into an agreement with it, and then say, okay, Lord, if there's anything in my day that where I'm going to get sidetracked, then I'm giving you permission to step in and get me back on track so that I stay in alignment with what I've heard, you know, or what has been spoken out over me for the day. Yeah. So it was just very, very, that were two of the things that were really, really very interesting in terms of, and they talked a little bit about, you know, okay, everybody has a book, everybody has a scroll, you know, some people can see them, some people read them very easily, some people do not. And on the other hand, you know, because Sam was saying that she doesn't see like Grant does, and she's gone to him and asked him, well, you tell me this, and he'll say, no, you go to the Lord. So in other words, don't try to find somebody who can see and say, hey, well, you look for me, you know, and tell me what you see. And so not about that if you are not in seeing, that the Lord can get the information to you. The important thing is you get in the relationship with him, and that's really what matters. And however it gets revealed, it gets revealed. So that was really, really very holding on to. And a lot of people said to say hi, wanted to know how you were doing, and asked me to say hi. So
okay. Okay. So when they when you pick the symbols, when you then looked at them from what they were, did you just get the letter then, or did you get this comic strip understanding of what that letter meant?
I went back, there's a website that I've used before, and they were recommending a guy who actually is an Orthodox rabbi who's written this book called Letters of Light. And it's like $25 on Amazon, but Joe found 2 legitimate online sources of it by his Orthodox organization. Yeah. But I had used this other website, and it talked about, okay, this is the letter, this is what it's constructed of, because some of them are made up of different letters. Yeah. Here is the total, well, like, you know, I think it's, I'm forgetting it. Here's what its sum total is, and then here's what numerology, and then depending on what the different letters are in it, when you add up those numbers, that's usually different than what its actual number is. And then they would equate it to, okay, the name of Yahweh is 26 letters. You'll see 26, I think it's 26 shows up in Lamed, and so they start making the cross ties. Then they tell you pictorially, this is what it depicts, and so this is the understanding pictorially of what it is. And then you start getting the idea between the numerology, the pictorially, how it's used in scripture, to give you a composite of what does the actual letter mean. It's sort of like a substance. Yeah. And then from that, you looked at that and say, okay, now does that resonate with who I am or what I have, you know, my life? And a lot of them very, very much lined up. And that's what they were saying. It would give you a sort of more of a snapshot, not the full revelation.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I've never engaged with that and never really felt drawn to the sort of the Hebrew things. I realized that in some of the writings, I mean, when we sort of have this, you know, all scripture is God breathed and blah, 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 you know, rather than all God breathed scripture is, and therefore anything written which is God breathed is useful for. And therefore there must be things which are outside of what we call the Bible, which are God breathed. And therefore they are useful. It's just making sure that you connect with those things that are, and you resonate with them. And I think there's probably revelation to be had in some of those things. I just never felt any real drawing to any of them. So I've never really looked into any other writings. And I guess because mostly I've developed a more of a conversational relationship with God, that I talk to him. So going through some living letter would be going through a mediator to me. You know, I don't need to go through a mediator when I can speak to the real thing. Now, I think when he speaks, those words are living. And if there is a living creature somewhere that is representative of that, awesome. I've just never really connected that way or ever really felt the need to. For me, it would be almost like a backward step. Well, I'm going to go and engage with some creatures rather than talk to God. You know, so yeah.
And they approach it more like when you deal with one of the great cloud of witnesses or any other spirit being. Yeah. It works. It's actually a spirit being. And again, it wasn't the kind of thing of, hey, go out there and try to find the letters. It's just, but if the Lord brings them to you, understand this is just another
way.
Part of heaven and a means of communication. And for me, I've just always, for some crazy reason, always been more attracted to the Hebrew and never really cared about the Greek. The Hebrew, just by natural, was always more interesting. So again, I mean, I didn't go and buy the guy's book. Joe found it for free. I'll take free. And he is sort of an interesting guy because I've heard him on video. And of course, and they made it very clear. They said, look, this guy is not a believer. He's not even a Messianic Jew. So there are some things you're just going to have to just like, woohoo, just discard, just, you know, eat the meat, spit out the bones. But
No, I think, you know, if something works, it's useful. I remember listening to Carl Whitehead in Cardiff a few years ago when he was looking at the word peace and breaking it down into the letters and what was it actually saying. And I found that 2 weeks before that, I'd had exactly the same conversation with God, like virtually to the letter conversation with God, who spoke to me exactly that what was revealed in that word peace that he broke down in discovering by looking at the different letters and the different meanings and the pictures and sort of describing the picture. I had exactly the same conversation. And I thought, oh, well, that's really interesting that it isn't a formula, but God, when God speaks, it is in a sense backed up by the living nature of the word that has been written. And so for me, I found that really interesting. I mean, it didn't cause me to go and want to, you know, go and study all the words to find out what they all meant, because that would take so long when I can talk to God. You know, but as you say, if you do have an encounter with something that brings you, you know, I've had encounters with angels and wisdom and seven spirits of God and all those things. You know, they're not my everyday experience because I spend my time talking to God. But they have been things that God has assigned to help, to inspire, to open something, a particular time. He could have done it himself, but then he's got an entourage of angels that he sends to do his will. So sometimes he will do that. So I found, it is really interesting, some of these things. And I think it's just making sure you don't get in any way trapped into, well, that's the only way God does something, or this must be the way God. It's actually, we've got a relationship, and the relationship needs to be continually refreshed. And I think God does things in different ways sometimes just to stop us getting in a rut, because then we can get complacent about it and actually sometimes take it for granted, rather realizing the amazing sense that we can actually have a relationship with the creator of all things and have that intimacy with him in an immanent sense, more just as the transcendent sense. I think it's awesome. And sometimes, if you take it for granted, he'll shake it up a bit.
Yeah.
I've done that numerous times in my life and journey, is shaking things up a little bit when I've been getting to be a little bit formulaic or non-relational, or focused on doing more than being, and he's shaking it back and sort of, hey, let's come back to the basics here. Let's spend some time together. Everything you do, let it flow out of me and my relationship with you.
Another thing that they brought up, that Grant brought up, he said, when you're in heaven, and of course heaven is so different from us, he said, when you're someplace, really pay attention to where you are. He said, because it's real easy to just go through like, isn't this cool? And he said, but really, he goes, if the Lord brings you to a place, say like you're faced with something that you've never seen before, because it doesn't exist here on earth. He said, really take the time to pay attention to what is this? Really look at it, in a sense, really study it. And I think the video is frozen because I don't think you got your eyes closed, Mike. I think it was frozen on my end. And he said, so like, he made the thing like one time he was someplace and he noticed that the grass, he said, and then he noticed that the grass was winding around his finger. He said, now, grass doesn't do that here. So he had to stop and say, okay, is there something that I need to know about this? Is there something that I need to learn? And so really to focus in on not just seeing something saying, oh, wow, isn't that cool? But to find out, okay, what does this really represent? Why am I seeing it? Or if the Lord brings someone to you, to not just sit there like, okay, what can I pick out of their brain to get for me? But to say, okay, who is this person in terms of really getting to know them, and not just be into it, okay, the Lord, the Lord sent you to me, you have something for me. It's again, the whole idea of relationship, that it's just not all about, what's in it for me. So that was also another interesting little tidbit.
Yeah. And I think for me, that's why I journal everything. And then I have the time to go back. I've found if I tried to analyze it while I'm having it, I would get distracted from what the whole thing was going. So when I journal something, it's almost like I'm cherishing it in my heart, and I plant some of those experiences in the garden of my heart. Then I can go back when I'm led to go back and re-engage and go deeper. Because sometimes the experiences are just like, whoa, this is just too much to take in all in one go. And if I start looking at all the detail, I can sometimes miss out on where I'm going or what I'm doing. So I've learned to go back and to use the things that my spirit really connects to as hey, I need to go and pursue that some more. I need to find out some more about that, which is the way it works for me. I find that it's easier to have the encounter. I journal the encounter, then I can go back to it when I need to. Rather than getting distracted. Because sometimes I used to get distracted by all the symbols that I was seeing, or why are they wearing this color? And, well, why have they got that? And well, that's a big sword, or what's going on with it? And you can sort of get, and actually they're trying to say something to you or take you somewhere, and you're sort of not in the flow of it. So I tended to try and, okay, I'm just going to go with the flow. Then I will then be able to then go back to anything I need to go back to at any point in time that I need to. And sometimes the way people have encounters are very symbolic of something and they relate to it. And other people would have the same encounter and wouldn't relate to it because it isn't the way that they're wired particularly, which is why I think these encounters are very different for each of us by design, because they're uniquely supposed to connect to us. You know, so when I see a particular thing, it triggers something in me to the meaning of that thing or the understanding of it. The same thing may trigger something else in someone else, which is why I think we should be careful in interpreting things for people out of our own understanding of the whatever it is, because I could interpret that for me, but it may not be the same for somebody else. So it's almost like that's where make sure you point people back to God for his unveiling of interpretation, rather than, you know, relying on somebody else, you know. And so, yeah, it's interesting, these things. Yeah. Okay. Well, nice to see you, Peter. How are you doing? Yeah.
Doing well, doing well. Just my schedule has changed so much lately. I'm not able to get on much anymore. So just hanging out a little bit today. I'll have to leave early again. So.
Okay, awesome, great. You got anything you want to share? Anything God's doing with you or unveiling?
This whole process of, you know, what a lot of people are calling deconstruction, you know, from all of the belief systems and everything that we've, I'll talk in first person, that I've had, has really, really changed the way I look at a lot of things. And I feel like my scope has broadened considerably, and I'm learning a lot of new things, and meeting with God and the things like we've done in the past, you know, going to heaven in different ways than what I had before, and new things have opened up. So it's just been really cool. So. And I know you, I thank you, Mike, because you were a big part in the beginning of that process anyway. So,
so is there any specific things that has been sort of new things that have been opening up, or when you say broadened, sort of what sort of things has God been sort of unveiling?
Well, I kind of got led down the avenue of looking at things more from a scientific way, you know, to really get a foundation again, and really started looking into physics and quantum physics and all of that, and found out that, you know, the whole physics world right now is in a tizzy about this idea that we live in a virtual reality. Basically, there's a whole bunch of different theories out there, but when you really start digging into it, which I have, there's some major truth there, because what they're basically discovering is there is this realm. Now everyone has different, or dimension, whatever you want to call it, everyone has different names for it, different titles for it. And some of them are very careful not to use religious terms, because it just gets people all, you know, just like the hell word. You can't use that word, because everybody just has their own belief system, their own culture, everything like that. But basically, I mean, the bottom line is they're saying there's this other dimension. There is an entity, whether you call him God or the all-consuming oneness or whatever, that has created this reality for us as spirit beings to come and dwell in and to grow and mature. And that's what we're here for. and that process will never end.
Hmm.
We will continue to grow even after this life is over. We'll have another.
Hmm.
You know, I know we used in current terms, we talk about reincarnation, but it's not really, you know, that's a Buddhist or Hindu term, but there's, I mean, we as Christians talk about, we go to live in a heavenly place, you know, and, you know, there's other things beyond. I mean, even you've said, who knows what's up in, you know, after we go to that other side. You know, we're going to continue to learn, we're going to continue to grow, and so it's just been fascinating to me to learn about some of this stuff from a scientific perspective and how they've come up to this conclusion. And I mean, and basically they're saying the bottom line is our goal here in life is to lower our entropy, meaning lower, you know, chaos is high entropy, low entropy is non-chaos and order. Well, what is perfect non-chaos and order? Love.
Love, yeah.
So our job is, as spirit beings, because this is just a earth suit or a virtual avatar, if you want to use you know, computer terminology, that we have come into to grow and learn, and that's our process. So that's where my head's been at lately, and looking at all of that, kind of stepping back from all of this arguing about all of the, you know, all the junk. I mean, I know you've been getting a lot of flack lately on some of the things, so I just had to step back from it. It was just too much, and then all of a sudden I said, Lord, you know, I want to know what's about, you know, what I want to get away from all of that. What is, and that's when I got led down this path, and it's been absolutely fascinating to me, and I've really enjoyed it. So that's where I'm at right now.
Awesome. I mean, in a sense, I mean, my first real heavenly encounter was all quantum physics and, you know, vibration and frequency and harmony, and I mean, you know, and I realized why God wanted me to know that, because, you know, of the way he has created everything and the way things do work between different realms and how we interact within the realms. You know, everything spiritual in reality, you know, everything we see has come out of that which we can't see with our physical eyes, but we can engage with and have that activation. So yeah, I can see that that's something which for some people, it opens up a whole different, for some people, like my wife, would be like, I don't need to know any of that. It's just over the top of my head. I just, you know, I can engage. I don't need to know how, why, you know, I don't need to know the details. Just show me, just let me do it, you know, which is fine. But some people, it gives an insight into the heart of God and the nature and character of God, because he's done that because it reflects something of his character and nature. And if you don't see quite how that all works, then you're missing out on part of understanding and engaging who God really is in the revelation of it. And yeah, I think there are ages to come where, you know, our maturing will go into co-creating and into, you know, that whole realm, you know, and we just need to continue to become like him, you know, continue to grow and mature and come into our sonship in it all. But it is interesting, isn't it, how a lot of people are afraid to actually use the religious thing because they know they're going to get hammered by the scientific community, because there's still a huge prejudice. But in reality, what they're saying is very much a spiritual thing. I mean, you know, that's a lot of quantum physics, you know, carries that thing. And unfortunately, Christianity gave the thumbs down, and sort of more Eastern viewpoints, you know, were open to receive that type of, hey, yeah, this fits in with us, you know, rather than, you know, we're, you know, Christians are always sort of the last to, you know, come into agreement with anything. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people came to the wrong conclusion because we didn't give them the opportunity of seeing a personal God within that framework. So they had to see the force or the oneness or the universe or whatever they want to call it. So they sort of almost connected to the creation rather than the creator. And I think we've got to reclaim that ground and help them discover the creator is already at work in them. And they're growing and maturing because he's at work in them, and wants a relationship. And I think this is the key point, is relationship. And that's the bit which is missing from many of the actual true things, but miss out on the relationship. And I think we've just got to really, I think, express that relationship in such a way that it becomes accessible to people. And the way we've done it very clearly isn't. Our presentation of this fixed, rigid way God is, and the black and white nature of what's right and what's wrong and all that stuff, has just alienated people rather than drawing people into discovering who God is in terms of love. I don't know whether it's actually a true thing, but I saw on Facebook a post where someone was saying, here's Albert Einstein's last letter to his daughter or something. And he was basically saying in this thing, keep this hidden until people are ready to receive it. But basically he and I'm not sure it's one of those things, Facebook's full of stuff, isn't it? But even if it's not true, it'll be great if it was, it's one of those things. It's true anyway, even if Albert Einstein didn't say it. But basically he was really saying that love is the energy of the universe, and that E equals MC squared. He puts love in there as the energy that actually is the only thing that can unify and things. And and he wrote this sort of, I read the letter anyway, and it was a bit like sort of at the end, I didn't give you enough of this. And because time is relative, I'm hoping that you will receive this now, even though it didn't affect you in your life. But the sentiment was really cool. But I think what was behind it was really true. Love is the core essence, of God himself, and therefore everything that is made to reflect God. Love has to be the core in it, and the energy and the power that's behind it, that is transformatory and in that way. So I think it's a good thing. I think that God's doing this and people are beginning to connect, because it's going to connect with all sorts of people. I remember I was in Winnipeg last year, and when I was traveling there, my flight got delayed and I didn't really feel to do anything about it, and I got the next flight, and I was sat there with a lady scientist who, I guess she must have been in her late 20s, early 30s. And we just had a really fantastic conversation about science and quantum physics and God and the spiritual side of it. She said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm going to do a conference. Oh, what's it about? Well, I said, the spirituality and scientific thing of quantum physics, and she was like, whoa. So we had this really good conversation because people are open. I think people are more open than is been presented, but they're not open to the old way in which we presented truth, as almost through this God that if he didn't like your version of truth, then look out, and so that sort of angry deity rather than a loving God, I think that's what's essentially put so many people off. We need to readdress that balance by living demonstrations of love and truth and being an expression of God and connecting to people that God's at work in. That's what I love doing now. I'm looking at people and thinking, what are you doing in that person? How can I connect to what you're doing? What have you inspired that person with? What's the thing that they're really into? Because that's going to be an expression of your outworking in their life. And if we can connect with that rather than, you're all separated from God and blah, 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 you've got to cross this bridge towards God that's this gulf. And actually, he's already bridged the gulf. He's already at work in everybody to bring to light this revelation of himself and that person and their destiny and unveil it for people, And it's so different. It's so easy to connect with people when you don't have this judgmental view of their lifestyle or their lives or how God sees them, but come in an accepting way to begin to connect with where they really are in their lives, not just where we think they should be, you know, and try and manipulate them into being something else than God made. I mean, how many people, you know, were more in tune with God before they became Christians than they were afterwards, because they then got conformed to a totally wrong image of religion through, hey, to be acceptable here, you've got to change your behavior. You know, you're not going to fit in here unless you stop doing that. You know, and it was all behavioral, you know, fit in. So change, you know, rather than how can we help you now discover even more how to explore who God made you to be, you know, well, I haven't got time to do that anymore because there are all these church meetings I've got to go to. So this was a passion in my life and now it isn't because I've had it churched out of me. You know, well, that's how many times has that happened? Now people are sort of, they haven't got any time for life because there's no life after church, you know, and I think that is such a sad thing, which is what's happened, you know. We've got to change it. You know, we've got to actually help people to live life and to know the love of God in their life, not just this religious thing that we've created called Christianity. Because Christianity is no better religion than Buddhism or Hinduism or any other ism, because it is a relationship, not a religion. Jesus didn't come to start Christianity. Yes, that's the thing. Man made Christianity. You know, Jesus was trying to stop us going down that route in the first place by keeping it relational. Hey, just love one another. You know, he didn't put too many other things on what we should be doing. Hey, just love one another. You know, and what have we created? A whole institution that actually really stops people loving one another mostly. Unless we agree with them, of course. Then we can love them. There aren't too many people you can love, are there? There aren't too many people who agree with you. You're limited to a few. So,
do you think that things would change or improve if people were more willing to share the full account of their encounters with God? And I'm speaking or referring to the voice of God, the resonance that voice carries, and our physical response to that.
I mean, I think if you have an experience of something, you can share it with others and there's a resonance and you connect with people. If you don't have an experience, then really it's theory. You know, and I think we need to have, you know, we're sharing the encounters and we're sharing the experience of those encounters because they're real, you know, and then others can connect with it. I think, you know, a lot of people, even in the new things that we're talking about, often they've never really experienced them. They'd like to, and they're actually sharing theory with people, which I think people see what's genuine and people see what isn't genuine. And so it's got to be genuine for us if we're going to share it with others, you know, and then it's authentic. It has an authenticity about it, you know, and, you know, if we're going to share something with someone, also the motive of our heart in sharing it has to be love. You know, we don't want to win an argument or prove a point and lose a person. You know, so it's so important to have love as the focus. And even, I mean, sometimes I totally disagree with people, but I won't tell them that. Because if I tell them that, they'll automatically think I don't want a relationship with them. Yeah. And so, you know, even though I would totally disagree with in some areas, it's like you need a level of relationship to be able to share disagreements with people and a different way of viewing things with people that essentially is not going to break a relationship or stop a relationship forming. You know, so I keep my counsel to myself a lot with people because I want to establish a relationship which opens up an opportunity of dialogue and sharing of heart, rather than, well, I'm going to tell you the truth so you can believe what I believe, you know, and well, I don't need to do that. That's not my business. It's the Holy Spirit's business to reveal truth. You know, I want to be a vehicle that helps someone discover truth. And I'm not going to do that by trying to win an argument or persuade them by some debate over something which actually they're probably not even going to connect to. The Bible doesn't say that. So what? The Bible doesn't say 100 million things. Doesn't mean they don't exist in reality. And we've got to really, I think, frame our use of the Bible very differently towards people. You know, because to be honest, most of it wasn't written for us anyway. You know, it wasn't even written in context for us. Yes, there's some universal truth within it, but I want a relationship with the author, with the inspirer of it, you know. And actually, did God inspire everything that's in the Bible? No. You know, because people have written stuff which God definitely didn't inspire. You know, it may be things that they actually said, or it may be actually a correct account of something, but it certainly isn't a reflection of God. But we made it so with this evangelical approach to inerrancy and infallibility and all this stuff. And therefore, people just can't understand how the Old Testament and the New Testament can be in the same book. You know, because the nature of this God doesn't seem anything like this God you're talking to me about, you know. And that is a huge issue. And I think it's a huge issue for a lot of Christians. If they're honest, how do you equate this with what I'm experiencing in Jesus? You know, is God two-faced? Well, of course he isn't. You know, and a lot of what was written is obviously written through the perspective of the writer. You know, is it inspired by God? Did he inspire people to write all of it? I don't know, to be honest. You know, now I can't say I fully know, because some of it I don't resonate with that meeting with the God I know, you know. And I realize that the way Hebrew idiomatic things are written proportion things to God that aren't actually God's. You know, like, you know, God killed all these people. And then you look at it and really what it was, well, you know, God actually, what he really did was actually let you walk your own path. Yeah. And it's like, hey, you want to walk your own path? Or you want to believe in foreign gods? Well, let them look after you then. See how you do under their covering of love, you know, because they're not too loving because they don't exist, you know. Yeah. Anyway, so you've got your hand up, Mary, there, so go on.
Well, just thinking about, we were talking a little bit earlier, it's like, so we really have to drop the I'm a saint and you're a sinner attitude when we deal with people.
Absolutely.
But another thing that they brought up at the meeting, and they were just talking about how all of us are blind to our faults. You know, that's just it. And so Sam was talking about that she went to Marios and said, look, you know, I want to give you the liberty that when you see something in me to correct me, because I know that I'm blind. And he was she said his initial reaction was like, I don't know that I want to do that. And so this is what he told her, which was really a good answer. He said, if I see an area where, if you want to, for lack of a better word, you want to call it a fault, he said, what I will attempt to do is to demonstrate the opposite to you, that hopefully you will see how I'm handling it is not the same as you, and you can learn without pulling out saying, hey, you got to go get this straightened out. He said, is to try to help you see it by acting out what is the right response. He said, and in the same vein, he said, in areas where I'm weak, he said, I'm going to look to see where you handle it right and then try to learn from you. And I thought, well, now that's a whole different way of helping people to grow, still helping them to ultimately where we all see where our weak spots are, but instead of coming down, and she said, hey, I want you to correct me. And he was like, I'm not real comfortable with that idea, but I think there's a better way to do it. And I thought, even dealing with people who aren't saved, it's not a matter of coming down and slamming them over the head with something, but it's demonstrating, working in a different spirit, where they can see a different way of handling a situation. And again, the whole idea of looking at people and seeing, okay, what has God placed in you that, you know, really needs to be brought out and really needs to be encouraged in you to help you to realize, hey, this is a gift. Like there's a young couple that we know from Starbucks, and he loves poetry, and they are recovering addicts, you know, the whole 9 yards. But and we've just gotten to know them, and we have now developed a real rapport with them. Now, neither of them gotten saved, but we have great conversations, especially between Joe and Andy, about the things of the Lord, and he's very open to it and he listens to it. But it's a matter of us just really speaking life into them and encouraging them. Hey, you know, you can go to God. You can have a relationship with him. We're not going to try to tell you necessarily how to do it. I mean, if you ask us, we'll give you some pointers, but to just encourage them in that, but to also encourage them like, hey, this is who God made you to be. And, you know, go with it. You know, this is God working in you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's so many better ways than we've been operating in. Well, the evidence is there to see that it's not been that successful. You know, yes, okay, you can see in the long term, yeah, things have grown, but actually, what have they grown to become? How much really looks like Jesus? You know, yes, there may be 1 billion people who profess to be Christians, but actually, how much of that is really like Jesus? And how much of it is just a system, a title, a name? Well, I was born in a Christian country, so I'm a Christian. You know, and the reality is, you know, I think, you know, I see why people want to get away from using the term Christian or Christianity or anything which frames a system of belief rather than a relationship, you know, because it started out relationally and it continued relationally until it got institutionalized and the relationship side of it was lost in so many different ways that we've got to recover true relationship, both with God and each other. This is what it's really like. You know, this is what, when Jesus talked about being his disciples, this is what he really meant, that you would love him and love each other and love yourself, and have everything was about love. You know, live loved. You know, life takes on a whole different perspective when you live loved. When you know that you're loved, that you know you feel loved, you know you're accepted and loved by God, you live out of that love perspective, then life can be loved. I mean, I love living, you know, and I can then look to how can I live loving? How can I live in that loving way towards everybody that I meet, you know, and everyone, and even those who would see themselves as my enemies, how can I love them? Because I'm never, ever going to do anything that's going to resolve an issue between anyone without love. It just isn't going to work. It's never going to work without love. You know, we try political solutions. You know, we try solutions using more aggressive methods, and none of them work. You know, love is the only thing which is going to work. And I guess God lets us get to the point where we see nothing else does work. And we get to the end of all our self-DIY methods and realize that love is the only way. You know, the bigger bomb doesn't work. You know, the political solution has minimal effect. You know, it's love outworked in relationship, which is going to be key. And I think it may be idealistic, but look at the world. It is not exactly working too well under the old systems of things, you know, and we've got to find the truth in it and be expressions of love so that people can see it in action and feel it and know it, you know, and be available. Creation is going to respond to us when we are sons demonstrating love. Yeah, not just power. The power is the power of love, whether that be to heal or to make someone whole. It's still the power of love, really.
Well, another thing they talked about, and we've talked about this too, is dealing with situations like when a storm comes up, using your authority. And they were really emphasizing the fact of use your authority if God gives you the authority to use it, and if he doesn't, leave it alone, you know, because either he's got somebody else to handle it, or, and so they were relating a situation with Nancy Cohen where she went in after the tsunami that hit Indonesia, when I forgot how many, I mean, it was like over 100,000 people died or whatever. And she was really upset. And, you know, she said she got there and it was really, really bad. She was one of the first relief teams coming in, and she was like, she got really mad at God and said, hey, you know, you promised me that there was going to be revival here. And now this has happened, and this is horrible, and it's total devastation. And she was really mad. And as it turns out, she said, the flip side was when the relief people came in, most of it, he said probably 80% of it were Christians. There were no Muslim relief agencies that came in at all. And all of a sudden, the people were so open to say, I want to hear about this God. You know, you're coming here to help us. We don't have, our God isn't coming to help us. Tell us about your God. And all of a sudden she saw that what in the natural was really a bad situation opened up this door for the other people to say, well, hey, our belief system isn't giving us a shred of help. And you're not supposed to be the good guys. You're the great Satan, but you're the ones that are showing up here helping us. And so just the whole idea of like, God can take the worst circumstances that, you know, we don't necessarily understand and totally use it as an open door. But then going back to the same thing about, you know, don't necessarily jump in and, you know, we do have the authority to stop things, but if you're going to do it, make sure he's told you, you have the right to do this. And if not, leave it alone, because as crazy as that situation sounded, it opened up such a door for the gospel, you know, and for, not I said the gospel, but for people to come into an encounter with Jesus by a very unusual situation. So just, as you say, when you have a mandate, use it. And if not, leave it alone.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, definitely so. We don't want to be stepping outside of any realm of authority that we have, because immediately you're operating in your own power and your own strength, and therefore doing it out of your own understanding, which is never going to be successful. You know, so it is important to, you know, to actually be able to effectively do that. You know, be confident in God, to trust him. You know, we've got to trust God in all this, you know, lean not to our own understanding, trust him. And if he says, don't do that, don't do it. You know, even though everything in us emotionally or compassionately wise may be leading us to do something, don't do it. You know, unless you've got a very clear direction from God, just don't do it. You know, and I've asked, you know, I've seen things in the atmosphere and seen things, God, do I have any permission to deal with this? Most of the time it's no, you don't. You know, and sometimes it is someone else is doing it. It's not your role, someone else is doing it. And sometimes when things happen that don't make any sense, you just, do I trust God when I don't understand? Easy to trust God when you do. When you don't understand, and do I need to understand to trust him? You know, and that was all things I went through in my own journey to bring me to a point where, you know, I don't need to understand, but I do have a relationship of trust, and that is based in love. And I know God is love, and I know everything that's love is of God, and everything that isn't of love isn't of God. So if love for me is the thing I can measure anything against, to see, is God in this or isn't he? You know, but his desire, even for those who don't love him or don't want to love him, is no different from those who do. He loves each of them the same and wants to bless each of them, each of his children, whether they know him yet or not. His desire is for blessing and to bring good out of everything that's going on in their lives. Yeah, and that, you know, that is the depth of God's love. You know, and he does love the abused, but he loves the abuser just as much as the abused. Now, for us, our sensibilities, that just doesn't stack up, because we want retribution and vengeance and punishment, whereas God wants to bring reconciliation and bring love into a situation. You know, and it's so hard for people to, you know, to accept that God can love, you know, the victimizer as much as the victim, but he does. And if we look at someone who is a victimizer and we don't demonstrate God's love to them, then we're not reflecting how God feels about that person. And it is a huge challenge, I think, for how we deal with situations we see around and terrible things that are happening, and to keep the right attitude in it and not get judgmental or look for our own form of justice. You know, and it's just as well that God doesn't let us have our whole form of justice in everything, you know, because, you know, if we're not motivated by love, then what we try and do is not going to have the results that God really wants, you know, out of anything. All right.
Well,
okay.
That's the question that he asked, according to Bob Jones. Did you learn to love?
Yeah. Question is true. You know, everything, the very essence and nature of God is love. Yeah. And the closer I get to him, the more I see how that's outworked in everyone's life. You know, and that God's at work wanting people to experience that love in their lives. You know, and he doesn't have this negative view of all the people. You know, I mean, how can, you know, it doesn't make any sense even biblically when you look at it. You know, even when we were his enemies, he sent Jesus to reach us. You know, it doesn't make any sense that he's going to not love people if he reached us when we were his enemies. You know, well, when we thought we were his enemies, that's the thing. He didn't ever see us as his enemies. You know, and that's the thing. No one's an enemy of God from God's perspective, but from theirs, they may well feel so. You know, but love is the only thing which is going to conquer and overcome that, which is why Jesus focused on it so much. You know, and even when he was sort of pointing out to the Pharisees and the religious leaders the potential end point of their lives if they didn't turn them around, it was because of love. It wasn't, hey, I want you to go and die, or to be outside of my covenant of love, or, you know, I don't want you to have to be that. That's why I'm warning you. You don't need to be. Not, hey, I'm just telling you this so I can then later on do it. You know, and it wasn't that God destroyed Jerusalem. Rome destroyed Jerusalem. Yeah. You know, it's like the consequence of stepping outside of God's love and protection was you're open to your enemies. You know. So, yeah, love has got to be the key. Anyway, all right, I'm going to leave it there. I'll catch up with you next time.